Muy buenos días a todos. Good morning to all. Welcome to the Mexico-U.S. Relations Outlook as part of the Mexico's Manufacturing Supply Chain Summit. This time we have a very rich panel to present to you all. In Mexico now, this is our 111th event over the past 18 years. And all the other events were, of course, face-to-face in Mexico, the US, and even in Europe. But now, because of the pandemic, we have felt into the virtual scheme. We hope you enjoy it. For this event, the Mexico Supply Chain Summit, we have gathered 6 webinars. You can see them at the website. So far, as of today, we have 3,212 registrations over the 6 webinars. We don't mean to say there are 3,000 people because many may duplicate attendance, but we have over 3,000 attendees for the webinars. Also, as you know, as part of the platform of the event, we have B2B meetings. So far, we have over 300 companies participating, and we've reached the mark of over 500 B2B meetings active that are going to be developing over the next 3 days. As you know, this event goes from October 6th to the 8th. And we have 2 webinars every day, and the B2B meetings do develop in the afternoons. With that said, it is my great pleasure to present our first panelist, which is Mónica Lugo Aranda, the Director of Institutional Relations at Prodensa. Mónica has been very active in the negotiating of trade agreements, particularly the USMCA, and as of recent, she was named as Forbes magazine part of the 100 most powerful women in Mexico. Welcome, Mónica.
Hello, Sergio. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation.
It's our pleasure to have you, Mónica. If you would take a couple of minutes to tell us about your work, your experience, and your plans. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, as you mentioned, I used to be a government official. I worked 12 years in the public administration. And last year, at the beginning of 2019, I joined Foreign Affairs Ministry. I was able to participate in the process of the USMCA ratification. And before that, I was in the Ministry of Economy, where I participated in various trade negotiations. And finally, this year, in 2020, I joined the private sector. As you well said, I'm in Prodensa, and currently I'm working at institutional relations in this company, which I'm very happy to do so.
Thank you, Mónica. Welcome, and you certainly bring a lot of value added to our panel over here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Enrique Perret, the director of the US-Mexico Foundation. As you know, Enrique has participated for many, many years through ProMexico in the development of strategies between Mexico and the US. Welcome, Enrique.
Good morning. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you for to Mexico Now for this webinar, for the invitation. I'm super happy to share this panel with Mónica, Chris, and Juan Vasquez from Index. I think it's a true honor. As you said, Sergio, I participated in the federal government for more than 12 years, basically on economy promotion or development promotion. Under ProMexico and also under the Ministry of the Economy. I also participated in a couple of years under the Banking and Securities Commission in Mexico. But and now I'm living here in Washington, working for the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. The main goal of the foundation is to engage with Mexico and U.S. on a better understanding. So I think everyone here wants a more dynamic, let's say, economy between Mexico and the U.S. It's obviously through the agreements, it's through the businesses, and that's what we're doing right now. So happy to participate here. Thank you, Sergio, again for the invitation.
Thank you, Enrique, and welcome. You've been a road warrior for many, many years. Next, it's my pleasure to present Christopher Wilson, the Deputy Director of the Wilson Center. He's a very old friend. He's been supporting of MEXICONOW projects. Welcome, Christopher, and thank you for participating again.
Thanks so much, Sergio. And yeah, thanks for the invitation to be together with you and my other friends and colleagues on this panel today. I'm the Deputy Director of the Mexico Institute at the Wilson Center. I've been there for about 10 years now, so I've had the opportunity to give Monica and Enrique and all the other government officials a hard time from the outside, from the think tank world, while they've been doing their hard work while they were in office previously. The Wilson Center, for those of you who don't know us, we're a think tank based in Washington, D.C. And we're actually also the memorial to President Woodrow Wilson. And he's, interesting fact is, the only US president still to date that has had a PhD and also been president. He was the head of Princeton University before becoming governor and then president. And so in his memory, what we try to do is bring together the worlds of public policy and of academia. So we at the Mexico Institute try to perform research and bring together the best research and information and offer that to policymakers, create policy recommendations based on that information to improve US-Mexico relations. We're the only think tank in Washington that has a team dedicated 24/7 to US-Mexico relations and improving them. We also just recently, this past year, participated in a project together with the US-Mexico Foundation called the Convocation, where we brought together all of the, or invited, and we had come 12 of the former ambassadors of the US to Mexico and Mexico to the United States, and had a really fascinating few days of discussion on the future of US-Mexico relations. And so I'll be happy to share some of the insights that we garnered from that process with all of you and your audience today, and talk about some of the other research and work that we've been doing on things like the USMCA and the future of US-Mexico relations at a time of, you know, elections and political change in our countries. Thanks again.
Thank you, Christopher, for participating again with your deep and really shaking thoughts. Next, I have to announce that Luis Aguirre, the president of Index, unfortunately has felt ill. We hope for a quick recovery. He apparently doesn't have the COVID, so that's lucky. But we're also lucky to have in his place Juan Antonio Vázquez, who is the Director General of Index, the Consejo Nacional de la Industria Nacional de Exportación, Maquiladora y Manufacturera. Welcome, Juan. Juan has spent over 10 years in industry, working for other companies such as Toyota, and now Index has been lucky to land him. Welcome, Juan.
Thank you very much, Sergio, and I'm very happy and also very honored to share this panel with Monica, Christopher, and Enrique. And good morning, everybody. And just to give you a little bit of overview of what we're going to be talking about from our point of view, I represent the manufacturing industry in Mexico. Next, please. I'm going to share some of the figures. I'm not going to go over them. I think I can share this document with everybody, but basically we are in the entire country almost, in the northern center and also southeast of Mexico, and we cover many of the industrial sectors such as automotive, auto parts, electronic, aerospace, medical equipment, food and beverage, textile, jewelry, etc. Next. We also represent 17% of the formal labor in Mexico. So we are very important for Mexican economy, for the formal economy. And we are the main generators of foreign capital for Mexico. Next. There's some of the main figures. We represent more than 3 million jobs, 65 of the permanent manufacturing jobs in Social Security in Mexico. We pay 25% more on average than other industrial sectors in Mexico. And we represent in exports more than tourism, more than the oil in Mexico. So we are a very important sector for Mexico. And we've been very hit right now with the COVID and the pandemic, the crisis in Mexico, crisis in the world. And also we are a main target for many of the international political, economic issues that are going on right now, such as trade wars and other aspects. So I'm going to be sharing some of our perspective with the questions that we're going to be getting during this panel. And I'm very happy and looking forward to sharing this information with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan. Index certainly does a fantastic job in keeping all of those maquiladoras working. Okay, so we have presented our 4 panelists. I will direct questions to each of them. We have prepared 4 questions for each. And our first victim here in the webinar is Enrique. Enrique, throughout its history, Mexico has had an ambivalent love-hate relationship with the US. How do you rate the current status of US-Mexico relationships in general?
Yeah, well, I think always it's hard to rate, right, from 0 to 10, let's say, the relationship. It depends in which part of the history you are situated. I think if you take the last 20 years, we are in a very stable, let's say, situation, taking into consideration all the context, the COVID and the trade war between China and US, and taking into consideration the caravans of migration from Central America to the US. I think it's stable, right? So it's hard to give it a number, but we have a new agreement that I believe that's a good platform. I think that's good news under the context we're living. I think the US and China trade war puts Mexico in a very good position. I was reading the other day an article from a scholar from Michigan saying, well, the US need to look into the ally shoring, right? Not just the near shoring or reshoring, but the ally shoring. And in that list of allies, they for sure, I mean, US for sure see Mexico as a true ally, right? After 25 years of trading with Mexico, the businesses in US, the Americans see Mexico as a true ally. So I think my answer is it's very stable. We need to invest more in the relationship because you can pass from stable to an unstable environment very quickly. We saw some moments last year, the President Trump threatening Mexico with some tariff because migration, and that's what we are seeing. I mean, mostly the last 3 or 4 years under President Trump administration, mixing a lot of topics that in the past weren't mixed, like migration, security, trade, and that can guide you to a path of instability. Right now, again, I think it's stable. I think Mexico has a tremendous opportunity during the next 4 months with a second term of President Trump or with a new administration to leverage their position, Mexico's position on this reshoring, nearshoring, ally shoring, basically supply chain window of opportunity for Mexico. That's my answer, Sergio.
Thank you, Enrique. Yes, indeed, it's a complex subject, isn't it? Next, we will jump to Juan. Juan, the US-Mexico border region represents a combined population of 17 million people, many of which are active in the maquiladoras at the border, as you know. At the border is where the two countries practically clash. How do you rate the state of logistics for exporters in Mexico, both southbound and northbound?
Well, I think from a business organization perspective, we've always been pushing, and not only us, but many organizations on both sides of the border for more infrastructure. I don't think this is the only way to go. I mean, more infrastructure is always better to speed up the process and to have a better logistics between both countries. But there's also looking for more efficient ways to do border crossings. I think that's the best way to go, because the trade has been increasing exponentially over the last years. Well, maybe not this year, but in the previous ones we have. And I think it's going to continue. So we've been looking at other options such as unified manifest, for example, using free trade areas within our countries inside the US or inside Mexico, and then looking for secure logistics from there to the border and to speed up the process of crossing the border. Fast lanes for trustworthy or certified companies, unified export-import processes between both countries. So I think the way to look and to improve border logistics would be a combination of both, having more efficient procedures, which I think is the best way to go, but also, of course, increasing infrastructure. Infrastructure increases very slowly. The time it takes to approve a project is very slow compared to the growth. So we need to focus more on the efficiencies. And the other part of the questions with is how do exporters evaluate the current logistics? I think we always expect more. We would like to have to be faster, less costly. But I believe that we have gone very far with some of the advances that we've had over the last years, especially in automation in the processes in SAT and CBP. So in general, even though we will always complain because we will always want more and better and faster and cheaper, I think we've done a very good job. The governments have done a very good job, and I think they continue to do so. So basically, we also have some organizations and some groups or tables of discussions between both countries that help do more improvements or suggestions. And I think this is the best way to communicate and to improve for the future.
Thank you, Juan. Indeed, a monumental task. We now turn our attention to Christopher. Chris, as Enrique pointed out, last year, President Trump threatened to place tariffs on Mexican exports unless the country acted to help stop surging immigration from Central America. What is your ideal US immigration policy?
Yeah, so that's a huge question, Sergio. I don't even think I'll try to answer all of it. What an immigration policy should do is very multifaceted, right? I mean, it needs to be welcoming to people because of family reunification. We need to focus on bringing in workers that we need, temporary workers. There's so many components. But what I think I can focus on maybe in a useful way is how it's impacted US-Mexico relations over the last few years, and maybe some potential opportunities there as well. I mean, right now, the impact of immigration as a policy issue is negative on US-Mexico relations. It's the major source of tension between the two countries. I mean, now while immigration is low during COVID, maybe the pressure's off a little bit. But in terms of what's happened over the last several years, massive pressure has been put on Mexico by the United States to help the United States enforce its immigration policy. Mexico, because it's become a transit country for Central American migrants, has gotten caught up in this issue of Central American migration to the United States. But you know, the fundamental thing here, and you pointed out with your question by asking me about the what's the immigration policy, the best immigration policy for the US, is that this is understood in the United States as a domestic political issue. It's not understood as a part of the US-Mexico relationship. It's understood as something the United States needs to decide on, set its policy on, and then perhaps work occasionally with Mexico to implement the policy, but not to create the policy. And that's a big challenge. What it means is that migration has yet to be successfully integrated into the US-Mexico relationship. And I would say on the other main issues, on security and on economics and on trade, we have seen transformations of US-Mexico relations over the last 30 years. And we're still awaiting that on migration. So NAFTA flipped the entire script in terms of US-Mexico economic relations. Mexico had for years held up, big tariff barriers, held the United States at bay because it was worried about the influence of a giant neighbor on its economy, and said, you know what, instead of keeping the United States at bay, we're going to integrate with the United States, and that's actually going to make us stronger. On security, something similar happened through the Merida Initiative, because of cooperation after 9/11, the terrorist attacks in the United States. There came to be an understanding that actually close cooperation on security issues would ensure that we had borders that stayed open and functioned. It would allow us to tackle transnational challenges like organized crime that operates across borders without respect for international boundaries. And now what's left to us is to find a way to make a similar advance on migration issues. And thankfully, there is an opportunity there. And that's that Mexico is no longer a net sending country of migrants to the United States. Just as many Mexicans are returning to Mexico today as there are entering the United States, right? Net zero Mexican. Instead, over the last several years, the big flow has been one of Central Americans. That means that Mexico has become primarily a transit country in terms of migration, also increasingly a destination country as more of those Central Americans stay in Mexico, albeit a much smaller number than try to come through to the United States. But what that does is it helps align the interests of the United States and Mexico. We now jointly share this challenge of managing regional migration flows in a way that's good for our economies and in line with our values as countries. And that's a big challenge, right? It's not a minor thing to deal with, but I think there is a big opportunity for the US and Mexico to come together and actually try to solve some of the problems in Central America together, to promote development in Central America. Maybe even, this is a bold idea, but maybe even think about really expanding the notion of North America to include our Central American neighbors and really make that a fundamental part of our joint development strategy between our nations. So there's a ton of things to do there. I mean, we could look at areas for cooperation in development in Central America. We could look at a temporary worker, improving our temporary worker program, including Mexican workers in a special status. We could look at updating TN or NAFTA visa categories. That was something that was left out of the USMCA because of its political sensitivity. Maybe an opportunity will open politically for that in the future. We could look at incorporating things like training for workers into special visa categories. So making sure that since we build products together in North America, that we can actually train our workers together so that they're the best workers in the world and the most competitive. We have the most competitive workforce across our three countries. So there's a lot we can do. There's a lot we can talk about, but there's just no way to get away from the political challenges of the issue. And I think we'll have to continue to face those, but hopefully together, not separately in the future.
Very good, Christopher. Nice and extensive advice. Some global analysts have said that the US is currently happy with Mexico because it has solved the immigration and the trade problems that they were facing. And with that, we bring our attention to Monica and to touch on the USMCA subject. And as all of you know, Mexico and the US trade about $1.7 billion per day, every day, including Sundays and holidays. Monica, who benefits more with the USMCA in the long haul, the US, Mexico, or Canada?
Thank you, Sergio. I think this is a very important question because As we have seen, NAFTA has been the most important instrument for the modernization of the Mexican economy in the last 25 years. But and not only that, it didn't was enough about lowering tariffs or eliminating technical barriers to trade. What NAFTA did, and I think it's very important to understand why the USMCA is so important to the region, is that in the long term, NAFTA contribution was establishment of trade rules. And that not only affected the region, it affected the whole multilateral trade system. So in key areas such as investment, intellectual property, competition, antitrust, agriculture, in all these key areas where all the three countries benefited so much. So for me, it is important to say it's not one winner, it's not one loser. It's all of the three countries benefit enormously from this trade agreement. The USMCA is a natural development from NAFTA. It takes a lot of it, the most important disciplines, but not only that, it modernizes it and it improves it. So I think for the USMCA, we have 4 points that are the most important thing that we need to consider to the region. It preserves free trade, you know, as a preferential access between the three countries. It modernizes the agreement, includes new chapters that they were not before, like e-commerce or you know, SMEs or the other new chapters that just were not there before. It's an agreement that is more sustainable and responsible for minorities. For example, as we mentioned, it has very important disciplines for labor, environment, but it has also new ones for like anti-corruption, that it's the first treaty ever negotiated that has all these very important provisions for anti-corruption, for example. And it's also very important that it preserves the dispute settlement mechanism, because that was something that was something that the US, for example, didn't want to include. So after all, and the most important thing that we had a very good lesson from NAFTA that we learned is that the USMCA will be a treaty that will be reviewed every 6 years, and it could be improved or it could be changed. It is a dynamic treaty that it will adapt to the necessities of the three countries in the long term. So to answer your question, I think everybody benefits from this treaty, and I think it's going to be a very important one for the world, also as an example of how the trade rules will have to function in the future.
Very good, Monica. Thank you. We are all in a win-win-win situation, hopefully, as you said. We continue with this subject and turn our attention to Enrique. Enrique, trade is a crucial driver in US-Mexico relationships, as Monica explained. Moving forward, what actions do the US and Mexico need to make the region more globally competitive in manufacturing in trade? What can we do more going forward?
Thank you, Sergio. And I think that the first move we need to make, and Chris mentioned this, it's workforce integration. I mean, you can have in both sides amazing facilities, infrastructure, but if you don't have the know-how in place, it's going to be hard to move forward in new industries, right? Where now with COVID, we're talking in Mexico about fintech, about e-commerce. We're talking about new industries, right? Development of software and I mean, healthcare, and I feel, at least is my opinion, that Mexico needs to integrate more more immigrants, and if it's Americans, it's better, right? Because you are doing a more competitive region. We need more Silicon Valley in Mexico, right? In Ciudad Juarez. We need more of Austin in Monterrey. We need more of Miami and Chicago and New York in Mexico City. But I believe also for the economic recovery in the U.S. will need more Mexicans working hard through temporary programs, like Christopher said, that we have a long history on that, but we can improve those programs. We can increment those programs and take advantage of that. I think, again, Chris was saying, well, the trade and the security and other topics move forward in the agenda of Mexico and U.S. I think migration is still, it's still behind, let's say. We need to move we need to move forward on that topic, especially on workforce. I think we can see the benefits right away. I think we can present success stories right away, but the thing is not in the agenda right now. That's the thing. It's not in the agenda to improve these programs, to increase the movement between Mexico and U.S. of the workforce. I think Tony Wayne from the Wilson Center is talking more and more about this from the Institute, and that's the right way to go. I mean, you can improve, again, the infrastructure in the border that we need to improve, right? You need more technology, not just for trade, but for security and for the movement of people. You can do dual investments on energy, and that will increase the competitiveness, right? Energy, for sure, it's a huge issue at least on the Mexican competitiveness. I mean, the U.S. is now at the top countries on generating energy, but I think workforce integration needs to be the future. It could bring new risks or problems like the European Union, right? But integration is the future. I mean, I don't see how California and Baja California in the Mexican side, or Texas with Chihuahua, Coahuila, Tamaulipas, Arizona, Sonora. I mean, those regions, if we don't move forward on the workforce integration, we're gonna lose competitiveness against other regions.
Thank you, Enrique. Indeed, a very interesting subject. Right now it's being solved for the agriculture, but we need to move higher up in the technology and other types of work. We now turn our attention to Juan. Juan, you well know that President López Obrador has not been particularly kind with foreign investors. Juan, do you expect U.S. foreign direct investment to continue to flow to Mexico once the pandemic recedes? And what sectors, if any, look stronger?
Yes, I do expect for foreign investment flows to come back into Mexico, because I think the pandemic has shown the difficulty of working with borders, with many borders, or with long distances. So Mexico, in that sense, will be more competitive than other countries in certain kind of industrial sectors. And those industrial sectors are the ones that have also been growing over the last years in Mexico, such as automotive, electronic, and some other sectors that require for a short distance or a very quick response to the market. I do believe that this will come back. It may come back a little bit slower. I do think there are some policies that need to improve within Mexico to attract more capital into Mexico. But I do believe that we are still more competitive than other regions. I do believe that in Latin America, for example, there are many economies that are facing the same situation than in Mexico, and that with other things being equal, then distance plays a favorable factor for Mexico. We in Index are also lobbying constantly to improve some of the regulations, some of the proposals, the ideas that affect foreign direct investment in Mexico. And we do believe that we might have some kind of setback in the short term until some of the things are more stable. But coming back to the answer, I do believe that Mexico and the U.S. complement each other. The USMCA is certainly a big framework to work for making products more competitive worldwide. So this factor will continue for the long term, and if governments are wise and companies are wise, we will continue to see this integration with both economies.
Thank you, Juan, and hopefully Mexico will become friendlier, from the point of the authorities to direct foreign investment. Thank you. Chris, as you know, Mexico supplies 15% of all new vehicle sales that happen in the US. No wonder the auto industry was the main subject in the USMCA. What is your take in the long run for the geographical footprint of OEMs and suppliers going forward?
Yeah, well, Sergio, I mean, I think of the USMCA in general terms of having done sort of three things or worked in three areas. And this touches on some of what Monica talked about at the beginning. But, for me, the auto industry was one key piece, and the auto industry is really representative of the part of the USMCA negotiations that were meant to rebalance trade, to focus production in North America, and then especially based on the US objectives to focus investment in the United States. So that's a piece of it. And I'm going to go into that in more detail in a second. But we have to keep in mind that right alongside that, there was a modernization agenda taking place because NAFTA was 25 years old. So all of these things that Monica talked about, I mean, digital trade, we didn't have iPhones in our pockets. We didn't buy things on Amazon. NAFTA needed an update and it got one. So that was another big focus. And the third, though, which to me is quite frankly the most important thing that happened with the USMCA, is that it maintained, it's what it didn't change. It maintained the general framework of free trade across North America. And so it brought certainty back to investors, it brought certainty back to traders, it brought certainty back to supply chains in a way that really promotes the region going forward. And so I think the auto industry benefits from that, just like everyone benefits from that. The auto industry knows that it's safe to maintain a North American production platform for automobiles. And that's hugely important because automobiles fit in that category of products that Juan was talking about that are very sensitive to distances. It's very expensive to ship car components across oceans. It takes too long and it's too costly. So we mostly, not entirely, but mostly produce cars on regional platforms, either across Europe and in the periphery, in North America, or in Asia, the countries surrounding China and East Asia. So that will continue. And that's the most important thing in my mind. But there were big changes in the auto sector. You're absolutely right about that. And so the main ones were the changes to the rules of origin, raising the threshold from 62.5% that a car had to be made in North America. 62.5% of it had to be made in North America in order to get the free trade benefits associated with NAFTA. Well, that went up with the USMCA to 75%. So that incentivizes suppliers, more of them, to locate in North America to make sure that they can meet those regional threshold requirements, right? The other thing, though, that the USMCA did was create a special rule of origin saying that 40 for cars or 45% for trucks, percent of the vehicle needed to be made in a factories in North America where wages were for line workers $16 an hour or higher. Well, more or less what that's saying is in the United States or Canada, not really in Mexico. I've heard a case here or there of wages going up potentially in Mexico to meet those thresholds, but that's very much the outlier, not the norm. So what does that mean? I mean, what do those changes mean? Well, they mean that there will be greater investment in the auto industry in the United States in particular, in North America generally, so including Mexico in a general sense. There will be some more attracted to it, but all of that importantly comes at a cost. You know, why didn't suppliers already make all those parts in North America? Well, because it was more cost effective to have their production chain stretch across continents in certain cases. And so they did that. So what that means is we're gonna have to pay a little bit more for cars in North America. And so my concern is, can we be globally competitive in the production of the vehicles that do get made on a global level? So small cars, sedans tend to be made, you know, in Europe for Europeans, in Asia for Asians, and in North America for North Americans. But the high value added, the high margin things like SUVs and trucks are oftentimes made on a global platform. So they'll be made in North America, but then sold around the world. And so we need to now focus. We have this new framework, USMCA, but we need to focus on making every aspect of production and logistics and the movement, the know-how that Enrique was talking about, the workforce development, everything has to be super competitive so that we can do that in a way, even with these new standards, that will be globally competitive if we want to be successful as a region. And the last thing I just want to bring up is that, I mean, more and more cars are just computers on wheels. And so IP issues, intellectual property issues become important. Skills for the know-how of developing that software and integrating that technology and the hardware associated with it into vehicles is just increasingly important if you want to maintain an auto industry. And so for Mexico and for North America to maintain that focus, I mean, we've got a huge advantage now because there's a big risk in doing that type of work with China because of tensions between the United States and China. But we need to, again, focus in on the know-how, the intellectual property frameworks, the certainty for investors in order to capitalize on those opportunities.
Thank you, Chris. Indeed, a fascinating subject and well worth observing over the next few years. Monica, you mentioned that the USMCA would be reviewed every 6 months, supposedly for the terms to remain beneficial for all parties. What is the main benefit and the main cost for Mexico under the new USMCA?
Yes, well, just to clarify, I said 6 years, not 6 months. So every 6 years that will be reviewed. And well, first of all, I think we need to acknowledge the fact under what circumstances we negotiated this free trade agreement. And I think it could be very obvious to some people, but not to everybody, that when we negotiated the USMCA was under a very, very difficult time, in particular with the Trump administration, when they were saying they were becoming very protectionist, and they were saying they were using this narrative that all the free trade agreements that the US had signed were terrible trade agreements, but especially NAFTA was the worst agreement ever negotiated. So we need to consider that, because it was throughout the negotiation and throughout the different proposals that the US was putting on the table, the result and the outcome that turned out to be the USMCA, I think it was a very, very good one after all. So I think, as I was saying, the benefits that Mexico has, it's in a very horizontal way. It has the free access to the market, to the most important market in the world. It has a preferential access. It preserves free trade, which, as crazy as it sounds, but the U.S. was trying to have this administration of trade by putting controls on exports to reduce its deficit. So that was against the concept of free trade, basically. We have legal certainty that's very important for our investors. And we have, as I was saying, the modernization of the agreement, the updated agreement. So I think Mexico wins enormously throughout all these factors. I cannot say there's one particular thing, because there are so many that can benefit Mexico from this. However, I think there are some areas for improvement that throughout this revision, we can certainly make it better. So, for example, I think in labor, there's the protocol for amendment of the USMCA that was negotiated at the most recent part of it. I think that there are things that are we cannot change. I think that that is going to be very difficult, in particular in the coming administration, even if the Trump remains in power or Biden comes, that is a very important agenda for the U.S. Workers and the protection of rights for the workers. But for Mexico, I think that was something that it opens a lot of political reasons to have a case, and that was something that I think, in my personal point of view, that we could have done better, And as Chris was saying, for me, the oral rules of origin, I think you can have it in both ways. It's like you can have a more investment throughout the region, but the implementation of how you're going to prove your origin in the rules of origins could be and I don't know, we don't know yet, because the treaty is so new that we still need some time to adjust and to see how this implementation is going to work. But I think this is something that, if it doesn't turn out to be good for the companies, then it will have to be reviewed in this 6-year period, as I was saying. So I think that because we need to be more competitive, as Chris was saying, we need to have the best quality for autos to compete worldwide and as a North American region. So you could have rules of origin that are a little bit more strict and promote foreign direct investment, but also it could be very difficult for companies to obtain these levels or to prove the origin. So that could be also contradictory. It could not be so good at the end if we don't implement them well. So for me, that could be something that will need to be reviewed. And as Enrique was saying, I think something that the USMCA needs to include is the temporary entry of business professionals. As he was saying, that I think that is also something that it's important that the USMCA includes. It was not done completely for political reasons, but I think this could be something that promotes more the regional integration, that promotes more the exchange of professionals, and that certainly will provide more competitiveness to the region throughout the world. So I think these are overall, that will be for me, the 3 points that I will call them areas for improvement in the USMCA for Mexico.
Very good, Monica. And we're all glad that the politicians have taken tips for manufacturing with this continuous improvement 6-year review. It's something nice. We now turn to a little bit of a contentious subject with Enrique. Enrique, what are the main actions the US and Mexico should take to fight drug cartels and improve security in Mexico?
Thank you, Sergio. Security, isn't like any other issue, like trade or migration or the water crisis right now in the border between Chihuahua and Texas. That obviously doesn't include only those states. It's a country level issue, crisis, let's say. You need, Sergio, like an institutional architecture, right? This is one of the recommendations that Chris was saying, that we brought together 12 former ambassadors. And for me, the main recommendation of these ambassadors was, let's create this institutional architecture. I mean, you cannot have goals, you cannot have processes, you cannot establish channels to communicate if you don't have an institutional framework. The success of NAFTA or the success of the USMCA is that you have very specific rules, you have very specific, I mean, people or positions in each side that needs to accomplish something, right? And you can have some goals, right? If we are trading 1.7 billions a day, well, let's increase that to 2 billions a day, and you can have some metrics. I'm very concerned that even though we are in a very stable relationship, we don't have that institutional architecture. So we don't have that, and I need to be very honest. I think it's more because the U.S. side than the Mexican side. I know Mexico push to have this something like the high-level economic dialogue that we had with Peña Nieto and Obama under actually Vice President Biden was the one in charge of that relationship, and it was Videgaray the one in charge. And you had a specific metrics, right, for cross-border students or for entrepreneurship ecosystem or from investment in seed capital and venture capital. That's how the CEO dialogue was created under the high-level economic dialogue. And right now, I mean, I don't remember, and maybe Chris can tell me this, but I don't remember a cabinet level meeting between Mexico and the U.S. in the last 2 years. I mean, with López Obrador and President Trump, I don't remember one. And it's hard to tackle an issue like security that it's, I mean, a big issue is related with migration, is related with trade, is related with technology, infrastructure, financial system, etc., etc. It's very hard to tackle that if you don't have a trusty communication between the cabinet level, the cabinet on one side and the cabinet on the other side. I think there are many things happening on security, good things, but as a whole, I think you need that framework. The Plan Mérida tried to give that framework only for the security side. And I think it was very, very useful at the beginning. But right now, I think it's an old agreement. Let's say we need to reframe that. We need to renew the Plan Mérida. Both countries need to invest not only money, but people and resources. And we need to recreate the communication channels. And I think that's the way to tackle. I was having a conversation today with the ambassador from Colombia to the U.S. He was the vice president under Presidente Uribe. He was talking about security, and he listed I mean, you know, things to do on a crisis of security, and everything is about, I mean, control processes, goals, you know, talking with people every day. And I don't feel that is happening right now. Hopefully, again, on this window of opportunity of a second term of President Trump or a new administration under Vice President Biden, we can move forward on that architecture and that institutional framework.
Thank you, Enrique. And indeed, it seems like Mexico is more in the US radar over the past years. I remember back in the Obama times, Mexico wasn't really in the radar of the US. But now, at least that's one of the gains that we've gotten from Trump. He put Mexico in the radar, for good or for bad. We turn our attention now to Juan. Juan, changing a little bit the subject, as you know, technology increases productivity, but it also disrupts the labor markets. How do you see automation affecting employment and labor on both sides of the border?
Okay, I think this is something that has been very discussed by many groups that believe, have different opinions. Some have even gone to the extent of saying that automation may replace workers at the end, and we're going to see a very big crisis of labor opportunities for many of the people. In my opinion, I think it's not necessarily that way. I mean, there is a disruption, but even from, if we look back at the Industrial Revolution, I think they've always been talking of how machines can replace workers, and that at the end, there won't be any jobs for the people. But I think what happens actually is that it evolves, it develops into something more sophisticated. And at the end, I think technology brings other opportunities, but that do require different kind of skills, more sophistication. And at the end, those jobs actually pay more than what the kind of jobs that they are destroying, to call it in some way. So the disruption will come in the way in both sides of the borders. I think maybe the U.S. is a developed country, may be seeing this going at a faster pace. But in Mexico, we have seen some of the companies evolve to higher technology. We do have robots here. Not everything is made just with our hands. We do have robots, higher technology, design, engineering, etc. Not as big as in the U.S., but it is growing at a very slower pace. But at the end, it will require for people to get better education, higher education, more skills, sophisticated skills. And then you can see in the U.S. that even if, for example, U.S. is looking for manufacturing jobs, they don't actually satisfy their higher skill markets. They have a need for technicians, as well as we do have here in Mexico, the same thing. You can see that those kind of skills are scarce. So going back and hopefully making sense with my answer, I do not think that the technology will bring a crisis where there are no jobs for the people, but I do think it will require for people to get better skills in order to attend. And at the end, those that do have those skills will have a better life than what the basic skills give you. So that is our opinion here. I do know that there are other groups that have different opinions, opposed opinions, but that would be my opinion.
Thank you, Juan. Well, as editor, I often worry that machines are starting to write our articles. And so we are all potential displacements targets. Anyway, we now turn to Chris. Chris, COVID-19 has shaken our lives in the economy. How has the pandemic affected the global supply chains?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still seeing, obviously, the process is still unfolding. So there's a lot that we need to wait and see happen. But I mean, I think in a general sense, what's already clear is that it's making companies reevaluate supply chains. It's making countries reevaluate the way supply chains are managed and putting greater emphasis on some of the things that I think Juan talked about towards the beginning, shortening supply chains as a way of making them more secure, as a way of eliminating some of the risk or mitigating some risk with having huge globalized supplier networks that cross many borders. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we have to say, this is Mexico's niche, right? I mean, we've seen Mexico evolve over the last 30 years from a country that really is grounded and its comparative advantage is grounded in low labor costs to a country that's has its competitive advantage grounded in proximity to the largest market on the planet, the United States, right? And so Mexico is increasingly focused on those products that are bulky and difficult to ship, those things that need a short turnaround time to get to their market, those things that for whatever reason need to be close in terms of their suppliers to their market. And now that's just more important than ever, right? So that's
Mhm.
huge opportunity for Mexico and for North America in that sense. But in order to take advantage of it, there needs to be another piece of supply chain security firmly in place. And that has to do with emergency management. So what we saw happen at the beginning of the pandemic was we had systems in the United States of designating essential industries, and sometimes state level and local level, and the same thing happening in Mexico, separately from the United States, where you had essential industries being designated in a general sense from the federal level, but implementation very much left to the level of the states. And we saw a lot of different systems emerge. And we saw things like the production of ventilators, which would save lives during the pandemic, not being named as essential because they were for export to the United States rather than used domestically in Mexico. Okay, that was not okay, right? That was a huge problem. Then later on, we started to solve those issues, but we had questions of whether the auto industry would reopen first on one side of the border and second on another side of the border. So we had to move towards alignment in that. And we've slowly done it, you know, but there wasn't enough communication early enough, and there hasn't been enough clarity about what essential is. So we need to definitively solve that in North America. We need to create systems and institutions, as Enrique was mentioning, so that we ensure that the next time there's an emergency, and we don't know if it will be a pandemic or an earthquake or a hurricane or what, but we need to have a system in place to ensure that we manage our economy jointly, because it's essential to both of us. We need jobs, we need medical equipment, we need food, and we build those things together. We're in it together, so we have to manage them together. If we can do that, and I think we can, I think we're very well positioned to do that. But if we can do that, we will have solved not only the need for greater, proximity to market that's already been driving changes post-COVID, but we will have greater resilience in our supply chains and greater security in our supply chains in the face of emergencies than anywhere else, than any other region in the world. I mean, what's one benefit of having just 3 countries in North America? Yeah, it's not easy to coordinate, but we only have 3 parties that need to coordinate. Do you think they can do this in East Asia, to coordinate the designation of essential industries across Korea and Japan and China and Taiwan? And I mean, no, it's not feasible in the same way. The politics don't allow it to be feasible in the same way it is here. But we need to have the political will and vision to do so. And I hear Ambassador Landau, the US ambassador in Mexico, talking about this all the time. I hear leadership recognizing this. So it's something that's very much on the agenda, but it's just a huge opportunity for us in North America in the transformation with COVID. The other thing that's happening with COVID is that it's accelerated digital transformation. It's accelerated these trends of implementation of greater technology into the way we buy things, especially, but also it's doing similar things across various industries, let's say. And so it just takes us back to are we set up to do that? I mean, are we set up to ensure that we manage that process well? And to just build off what Juan said, and I'll finish with this, yeah, I totally agree with him. Automation isn't going to destroy jobs, it's going to change jobs. It's going to increase the skill needs, just as he said, but there's a risk there, which is that if we don't keep up in terms of our education and workforce development systems, then you have a bifurcated society, one of low skill workers that will earn less and less compared to their peers that are higher skilled that will earn more and more. And that's what's been happening. That's why we have greater inequality in countries like the United States and developed countries around the world right now than previously. We need to bridge that gap, because that's another type of supply chain insecurity, right? That drives things like a renegotiation of NAFTA when a bunch of workers feel like they're left out and left behind. If we can ensure that everyone feels the benefits of trade and integration and connection between the United States and Mexico, then we provide even greater certainty and security to our region and the supply chains that build our economies.
Thank you, Chris. And it's very interesting to observe how negative events may benefit Mexico. Another negative event that is going on is the trade war between the US and China. Monica, what, if any, are the challenges and opportunities that China may present in the near future in the context of the USMCA?
Thank you. Well, yes, it's a very important issue, the trade war between the U.S. and China. And this come also from what I was mentioning before, this feeling from the U.S. that there's a debt to be paid to them. There's a damage that needs to be repaired. And there's a trade deficit that needs to be balanced. So China is the biggest contributor, let's say, to this U.S. deficit, as we say, but it's also the biggest competitor for the U.S. I think that the war between the trade war between the U.S. and China is going to be in the long term, even if there's a new administration in power, because there's so much politically, economically, and geopolitically at stake. You know, there is so many interest in this war that is not only trade. I think it's also a political influence and so many other things. So I don't think there's going to be a quick solution for that. And in the long term, I think that is going to be, of course, bad for everybody. There's not going to be beneficial for Mexico in that sense, because that is just going to increase the cost for the U.S. market, and whatever happens in the U.S. market is going to, of course, going to filter to Mexico. So in the long term, is bad for everybody. It's going to be also a thing that is going to be very difficult to resolve. But in the meanwhile, I think Mexico can also benefit, and my colleagues have already mentioned this, from the supply chain that China represents to the world. So for Mexico, we are in a very privileged position, because not only we are neighbors to the US, but we have a free trade agreement with them. We have access to the most important market. So being smart about it and having how we can profit from this situation could be very beneficial for Mexico. We have been talking about the nearshoring, and Enrique mentioned also the allies for the US. Mexico is one, so we can be that substitute for China, and we can become the supplier for the US in some products. But not only for the US, we are also in Mexico, it's privileged to have free trade agreements with the rest of the world. It's not only the USMCA, which of course is our main partner, but Mexico has, and I remind you, we are part of the CPTPP with Asia. We are part of, we just modernized our free trade agreement with the European Union. We are part of Alianza del Pacífico, which is, you know, in the South American countries with Chile, Peru, Colombia. And we are, you know, we have updated so many free trade agreements that Mexico can benefit a lot from that, not only being part of the US partner, but also to the world. So I just think we need to profit this opportunity very smartly. I think the government has to continue and respect their compromise, their engagements, every discipline that we engage to comply. We need to do it, not only internationally, but also respect our own rules internally. So I think that is something that that is one of the challenges I think that Mexico needs to do, to accomplish, to comply with its own rules, to comply with international rules. But also, I think there are so many benefits that right now we can do. You know, we can, in Prodensa, will help companies to come to invest to Mexico. So we can continue doing that. You know, it's not, we have 25-year experience of doing this with the US. We became the manufacturer power in so many sectors. And I think we can continue to do that. So the thing is how this government, you know, is going to profit from all these instruments that we already have. And it's just right there, you know, the thing that is so frustrating for some people is that is just so simple. You just need to respect what you had already in place and to act accordingly, and to, you know, continue this investment promotion, to respect rules, to promote certainty, and just use your instruments and use your private sector to do that. And I think Mexico could do very well.
Thank you, Monica. Let's bring Juan into this conversation. It seems that the world is de-globalizing. I mean, global trade volumes have leveled at about 60% since 2008, since the Great Recession, and they have stayed at that level for quite a few years. Juan, has Mexico really taken enough advantage of its free trade agreements other than the USMCA?
To answer that, I would say, first of all, no. I don't think we have taken enough advantage of our free trade agreements. Actually, I don't think we have gone to our potential with the USMCA even. So there's always going to be room for better achievement of what we can do in terms of trade relationship with other countries, and specifically with other countries that are not as close to Mexico as the US is. I'm going to divide this idea into two halves. The first one would be, I don't think that diversification can go as far as we would like it to go in the case of Mexico. But I don't think that we can replace the opportunities that we have in the US with the opportunities we can have in Europe even, or Peru, or South America, or Asia right now, at least not in the midterm, just because of how easy it is to go to the US in terms of transportation, of historic alliances, or the way that we know the market, etc. And going back to just say a producer, if I am manufacturing a next kind of product and I have an opportunity in Spain and I have an opportunity in the US, it's much more simpler and easier to export to the US in terms of logistics, the times of response, the time differences, etc. So then exporting to Spain. So if you multiply that for an X amount of industries, then you can see that it just makes sense to have a higher dependency on the US than what we would have with other countries. Now, the second half of this idea would be, okay, thinking that we will not replace this big opportunity that we have with the US with the other markets. We have seen some advantages for some of the industries. I think, for example, automotive with Europe. We have seen some exports of agricultural goods to China and to South America, and even imports. So there are opportunities there that we are taking. But I do believe that we can always go further. And I do think that this does require some communication or master plan that could be organized by government with the help of private companies, but that would require some communication to go all the way down to the small businesses and to other businesses that do not even know of the opportunities that exist. So there are many things that we can do to achieve better results with our free trade agreements right now. Again, not only with other than USMCA, but also with the USMCA. But I do think that there's much to go. There's much to go, and no, we're not taking as much advantage as we could.
Thank you, Juan. And hopefully Mexico can diversify its markets. It's one of the key medicines for our well-being in the future. So we have three more subjects to go, three more questions. The next one is for Enrique. So Enrique, governments talk and develop policies and so forth, but sometimes they find it very difficult to find public support of their bilateral policies. How do we gain public support on both Mexico and the US going forward?
Well, I think always to get support, you need to show results, right? I think between US and Mexico, we have good numbers. We need to talk more about the success stories, right? We need to talk more about how were things before NAFTA, the new industries in Mexico. We need to talk about talk about cities, and we need to talk about states. We need to talk about companies with specific names. Sometimes we talk about US and Mexico, and we're talking about more than 500 million people, right? We're talking about 82 different states. And sometimes we forget to talk about the specifics, right? Um, I mean, even in the south of Mexico, even states like Oaxaca and Chiapas and Tabasco, I understand they were not the most benefit in the NAFTA agreement, but they have success stories. They have companies. They have industries that were benefit through the trade. So I think we need to talk about that. I think we need to talk with the consumer. I think through generations, if you talk with someone in Mexico City on the 20th or the 30s, the millennials and the generation something, they will have a very different point of view than someone who born in the 60s or 70s, right? Um, so they probably the youngest generation gives trade for granted, and they don't ask themselves, not having the trade, not having the US or I mean France products in Mexico, right? Or not having the prices that we have in any supermarket or any place in Mexico, right? Sometimes when you compare things through the past, or you compare things in different regions, you benefit from that understanding of that, or that new knowledge. So I think we need to talk more about the benefits, Sergio. Not only in Mexico, in the US. I think we weren't fast enough to transmit the consumer in the US, in regions like Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, the benefits of trade. And that's how you now find some bad rhetoric against NAFTA, or even just trade as a whole, right? I think we need to talk more about that. I think we need to engage on different levels. We didn't talk here about the opportunities that the states in Mexico in the border, or the states in the US can achieve through the US-China trade war. I don't see governors, I don't see mayors engaging with the world right now. I think they're all just looking inside the country, and I understand why. There is a huge crisis, and not enough budget to promote their states or their cities outside. But if we learn something from COVID, and it's that the fastest one is the one, and the fastest ones to change process, the fastest one to move forward, the fastest one to implement changes inside. And I mean, I'm talking about pymes, SMEs, big companies, states, cities, or countries. The fastest one is the one taking the advantage of what is coming, right? The fastest restaurant to implement new process to deliver, it's the one that it's taking advantage. The fastest supermarket that make the new the changes for new processes for delivery is the one that is taking advantage of the market. Well, it's the same thing with countries, and it's the same thing with cities and state. The fastest states in Mexico that that present the benefits to Chinese companies to be in the region, and the fastest one to implement a soft landing process, and the fastest one to implement a new policy on promotion is gonna take advantage of the other ones. And I'm not seeing anyone doing that, unfortunately. So I think that this is my last part of this conversation. This is, I think, our recommendation. We need to be fast. I mean, we have the rules, we have the USMCA. I mean, the context can benefit right now Mexico and the US. This can be, I think, benefit the whole border. But if we don't move fast, if we let this window of opportunity pass the next 1 or 2 years, I mean, companies will find another territory. Companies will understand how to produce in Colombia or Brazil and to send everything to the US. We're talking here with tons of companies that wants to substitute some suppliers. But if the suppliers in Mexico needs 2 or 3 years to create a new process, to invest, I mean, they don't have 2 years, they don't have 3 years. They will continue bringing stuff from Europe and China. I mean, that's the way it is. Thank you, Sergio.
Very good, Enrique. Thank you for your comments. The next question I intentionally reserved for Monica. Monica, Mexico's president has entered into what I call a useful marriage of convenience with Mr. Trump. What will happen going forward as Mexico backtracks the energy policy and the investors go and knock on Mr. Trump's door for help?
Yes, it's a very interesting thing that you call it as a marriage, because I think in this case it's an abusive marriage where Mexico is the one that's sometimes suffering the consequences, but at the same time is doing its own thing, without telling its husband or its wife. I don't know who's the wife, who's the husband, but Mexico is certainly agreed to some commitments in the USMCA, but it looks like, and it hasn't been really a case yet, but it has given the signals that it's not going to comply with some of its rules, and that's something to worry about. And of course, there's several mechanisms that the U.S. could address to solve this. Hopefully, it won't be by the force, because that's not good for anybody. But it could certainly use a dispute settlement mechanism through the USMCA to force Mexico to comply with it. We have seen there has been a lot of pressure, not with trade deals, but also with other issues, as Enrique was mentioning, with migration or security, when President Trump imposed tariff to Mexico in the migration issue, and that is not good either. I think that that has to be solved within its own channel. Right, but it's certain that the U.S. pressure to Mexico has worked somehow, and it has made Mexico comply with certain things that the U.S. want. And I don't think it's, as I was saying, that is an abusive relationship, and that is toxic. That is not good for anybody. It has to be a relationship where there are institutions and the correct channels to do so. So for just in a general manner, I just want to say, Mexico should respect its commitments made in the USMCA, it has to commit, as I was saying, to internal laws and regulations, but also the US has to do so and has to do it through the correct channel. And that is using the dispute settlement mechanism in investor state, for example, in this case, in the case of energy, if there's something that is not being followed through. And another thing that I want to say is also is just in general. I think that sometimes in the government, and I think that has to be, you know, the work of the advisors to the president. This is not only in regards to the USMCA, and that is very important. It is not that the USMCA is the only free trade agreement that obliged Mexico to follow these standards or to follow these obligations. It is also in other free trade agreements that we have with the whole world. So it's not in Mexico's convenience to not comply with them, because then you're going to have a tsunami of cases against you that will be in your own prejudice. So I don't know, it's very, very complicated. I think that for this government, they have to really understand the implications of what they're doing in a global basis, because we are not going to have the problem with the US only, which is, you know, a lot, but we're going to have a problem with the whole world as well. So there are investments from other companies, from European companies, Asian companies, from other part of the world. So they're also going to start making their case in this international forum that it's going to, you know, be a lot of very costly to Mexico, not only in a monetary sense, but also in the reputation and confidence that you're putting into your trade partners. So I think that is something that Mexico should be very careful, and that we need to understand what is at stake here. So I think that will be my answer.
Thank you, Monica. Well, indeed, the relationship between AMLO and Trump has improved from 4 years ago, and that's, I guess, is good for the countries. Chris, well, you get the last question, Chris. You're the lucky one. So the US and Mexico have settled on trade, but clearly the countries need a broader economic agenda. Shall we wait until the elections are passed to implement a more serious agenda? And the $64,000 question, which candidate is the best option for Mexico?
Well, thanks for the question, Sergio, and it's been a pleasure to be with you today. I mean, those are tough questions in some ways, not least because I work at a nonpartisan institution, and so I shouldn't take any sides in terms of the election. So let me just say a couple of things. I mean, on the first part of it, you know, the election's in a few weeks. Frankly, the election is underway. Tons of people have already voted in the United States, and they're voting now. Whatever we have now, we have before the election, and then we'll continue working after the election. There will be a period, you know, if Vice President Biden wins, there will be a lame duck period of a few months where we'll have to decide how to manage that should there be a transition. But generally speaking, I mean, we're already so far along. I think that we will be just de facto, we will be waiting to implement new things in US-Mexico relations until after the elections. Now, on how the two candidates differ, let me just make two comments. One on something that's different and one on something that will be the same either way, that I think is important to keep in mind. The first one is what's different. And I think one of the keys is institutionalization, right? So right now, we've had what we've been discussing again and again. We've had this kind of abnormal relationship between the United States and Mexico based on the precedent set over the last 30 years. We've had ad hoc and one-off negotiations on individual issues. Sometimes they cut across boundaries, so we make threats on tariffs to get an outcome on migration. But what we don't use is institutions and rules to resolve our disputes or to build a better future. Instead, we had a massive, important negotiation for the USMCA, but in doing so, we stopped having a high-level economic dialogue. We only had the single negotiation going on at one point in time. If Vice President Biden wins, you can expect a reinstitutionalization of the relationship and some stability that comes with that type of approach to the relationship. He, as was pointed out earlier, ran or helped lead, I shouldn't say ran because there are a lot of participants, the high-level economic dialogue, the cabinet-level dialogue on economic issues between the two countries. So he has been a part of, during his career, the construction of an institutionalized US-Mexico relationship, and he understands the value of that type of an approach. What it allows you to do is it allows you to work across a huge number of issue areas at the same time by, yes, maintaining leadership, but also having working groups that you empower to get things done on lots of different issues at the same time. And frankly, the US-Mexico relationship is so broad and complex and dynamic that if we don't have that, we're missing out on opportunities, right? We're not promoting women entrepreneurs. We're not working on a workforce development agenda because we're only talking about USMCA, even if USMCA is important, right? So that's one thing. But what will be the same, and this is something where I don't think we'd be going back to the Obama years or to years prior, is I don't think that the tensions related to trade, related to labor and labor rights in Mexico, related to energy and some of the issues that you just spoke with Monica about in terms of contract enforcement and meeting the standards of USMCA, I don't think that just all goes away if Vice President Biden is elected president. The US is still going to have trade conflict with China because that's a continuing and ongoing issue that has to do with US national interests. And the climate around trade, it's very interesting. In the United States, actually, the climate around trade broadly is more positive than ever. Somehow, during this era in which President Trump talked so badly about trade balances and the risk of offshoring jobs, actually the US populace supports foreign trade more than ever before. We support trade with Mexico as much as ever before. And now we have a trade agreement with a bipartisan support from Democrats and Republicans. So something interesting has happened there, but the pressure from groups that felt previously disadvantaged by trade and globalization, whether with Mexico or China or other groups, will continue. They still feel left out by this system of globalization, and they're still pushing the US administration to, whichever it is, Democrat or Republican, to push hard on Mexico on labor rights. And so there will be conflict there. There will be cases of dispute resolution that are used. There will probably be cases for dispute resolution across other sectors as well, based on the policies being implemented by the AMLO administration. And so we should expect a certain amount of conflict, but we should expect that conflict to be managed under a Biden administration, much more likely to be handled under institutional frameworks, and under a second Trump administration to be continued to be handled through these ad hoc, sometimes contentious negotiations that can draw in actors across the relationship. And I'll leave it there. Thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you, Chris. Well, Enrique, Juan, and Chris work for institutions which cannot be partisan. But Monica, you work for a private enterprise. So which candidate is the best option for Mexico?
Thank you, Sergio. Okay, I'm gonna take this as a personal answer, just of what I think. And I think definitely Joe Biden will be a better candidate for Mexico, just because, I mean, I don't think it's going to be less difficult, the relationship, because it is difficult, they have a very broad agenda, also Democrats, with all this social agenda, with, as Chris was saying, with labor issues, but not only that, environmental issues as well. So I think we're going to continue to see that. That is not going to go away. But I think the Biden, the candidate, he is more going forward to do things as they used to be, to follow institutions and to follow the rules. And that provides more certainty for real for the government, how they're going to react. And that's something that with Trump administration, we don't have. We as we mentioned before, we didn't use to mix the different issues that we have, migration with trade or security, and Trump did. And Trump threatened Mexico in a very particular way. So I think that definitely with Biden, we will see a more balanced relationship. Of course, we're going to continue to see a lot of things, but I think it's going to be better for Mexico, because at least we're going to know where they're going to come from, and we're going to have this more institutionalized and with more certainty. So that's my opinion. I'm not in the government anymore, so I can provide what I think it will be better for Mexico. So that's my answer.
No, and we appreciate your opinion. Well, we've gone well over our time frame. We have 12 questions from the audience. We will distribute those to the different panelists, and they will gladly answer by email, because we cannot take any more time from everybody. So Monica, thank you very much. Juan, thank you very much. Enrique, a pleasure talking to you. And as always with Christopher. We thank you, panelists. Thank you very much. And we thank the time the audience spent with us. And with that, have a good day and look forward to seeing you in the next webinars at the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you also. Thank you.
Thank you.